Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Robert Schmid, also known as Mr. IoT, and I'm the Chief IoT Technologist for Deloitte with a deep passion for all things digital. This week on Coffee with Mr. IoT, I'm talking to Jordan Stone, who is actually with Deloitte. We worked together. We just saw each other, actually, was it a week ago or two?
Yeah, I think so.
Hey, Jordan, how are you doing?
I'm good, Robert. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for being a guest on my show. It's so great to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited. I'm looking forward to it.
I said this to you before, but this is one of my favorite times of the week. I love having this kind of show where we talk. And you have this really interesting background. You're boomerang to Deloitte like me.
I am, yeah.
You were with Deloitte, you left and you came back. And I thought it'd be great if we talk a little bit about what you did while you were gone and what brought you back. How does that sound?
Yeah, that sounds great.
So what did you do when you left?
Sure. So in 2012, I joined Deloitte Digital right after they had acquired Ubermind here in Denver, where I live. And I was here for about 18 months, 2 years, and doing mostly a lot of mobile stuff, but was really starting to play around with Raspberry Pi and Arduino, and really starting to see what comes after mobile applications. Right. We really started to see a lot more interest in bridging the mobile and digital world with the physical world. And so while I was at Deloitte the first time, I was doing a lot of work with Bluetooth beacons and those sorts of things. And so that sort of started me down this path of hardware and physical computing. And so I kind of started advising for a startup here in Denver who at the time was called Detect, D-T-E-C-H-T, which I think they thought was a clever play on words. And what they were doing is they were building a small multifunction sensor to do things like smoke alarm detection, water leak detection, temperature monitoring, those kinds of things. And very quickly that sort of advisory, like what would it take to build a mobile app to support this role, turned into more of a full-fledged, hey, why don't you sort of come on board as our head of software, our chief architect, and really help us build this thing. So that was the summer of 2014. And we actually ended up getting accepted into the 2014 Techstars Boulder class, which is a top accelerator, originally out of Boulder, but they've got sort of accelerators all around the world. And so I left Deloitte in July of 2014 to go do what at that point had been rebranded as Loop Labs, do that full time. And we sort of moved out to Boulder. There were at the time 4 of us. So the 2 co-founders, myself, and then we had sort of our head of hardware who actually lived in Hawaii, but moved out to Boulder for the summer so that we could really go through the accelerator together.
Just the summer, you didn't do winter?
We just did the summer class, yeah. So, which was, I think, good for Sean, the guy who was running the hardware side of things, because coming from Hawaii to Denver or Boulder in the winter maybe would have been a bit too much of a shock for him. But he was actually from Colorado originally and left to go to Hawaii because of the weather. So, and then while we were going through Techstars, we thought that we weren't doing enough. We didn't have enough going on. So we launched a Kickstarter campaign that summer as well. It launched September of 2014, actually the same week as my wedding. So we launched a Kickstarter campaign on a Tuesday, and Wednesday I flew out to go get married. So that was kind of a busy week. But we launched a successful Kickstarter campaign. Our goal, we funded the whole goal in under 24 hours, and then ended up raising a little over $300,000 on Kickstarter. And then I was
a goal of 300,000, and you funded in 24 hours.
Yeah, so our original funding goal was, I think, $50,000 or $75,000, which we met pretty quickly. And then over the course of the rest of that 30-day campaign, we raised somewhere around $315,000. So it was, at the time at least, one of the top funded hardware campaigns for all of Kickstarter. So,
what do you think was the thing that really grabbed people? So you go out there, I mean, Kickstarter, I don't know what you did in terms of advertising. I have personally paid into Kickstarter and still haven't seen some of the products show up on my door. I'm waiting for this IoT-enabled barbecue measuring temperature measuring device, which still hasn't shown up. So I still have to figure out my stakes by poking them.
But what a time to be alive.
How did you do that? Just tell us about this. I mean, that's like amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it was really interesting. I think what grabbed a lot of people around the product that we were building was this really strong focus we had on the end user. So if you looked at other sensors that were sort of in the market at the time, you had platforms like SmartThings or similar products that you'd have to buy a door sensor or a window sensor or a water leak sensor. And so what you were really asking users to do was to plan ahead of time how they wanted to use these IoT sensors and to know exactly how many doors or windows or pipes or whatever it was that they had that they wanted to monitor. Our approach was really, let's not worry about that. We have one sensor. You tell us what you want that one sensor to monitor. And if you change your mind in a week or a month or a year, that's fine. You can just take your sensor off of the door and put it under a water heater, or take it off of a smoke alarm and put it on a window. And so we were really trying to build a more flexible platform, because we know that people, they wanted to have sort of the awareness and the intelligence that the Internet of Things promises, but they weren't really sure how to do it. I mean, 3-4 years ago, IoT was even newer than it is today, and even still today, right? Like, there's not a lot of people that totally understand what that means. And so what we try to do
is take
that cognitive load off.
So you get one sensor that did all these things.
Yep.
And you had a gateway, and it was a fully integrated solution, right? You didn't have to get a gateway from one vendor and have to get sensors from others. I just got this from you. I got multiple sensors. I stuck the same sensor on the door as I stuck underneath the sink to measure water, and then I just plugged something into the wall and off I went. Is that how it worked?
Yeah, absolutely. So the sensor itself was about the size of an Oreo, give or take. And inside of that sensor was actually 7 individual sensing components. Again, for things from water leak detection to smoke alarm detection, doors and windows opening and shutting, those kinds of things. And then, as you mentioned, we had a small bridge that the sensors would connect to that would actually do the transfer of data from the sensor to our backend in the cloud. And that's really where we did all the heavy lifting, all this obviously data storage, machine learning, sensor data processing, all of that stuff. And the goal was really to build a technology that sort of disappeared. You'd put it in your house, and then you'd never really have to think about it again. So we intentionally built a very small bridge. We intentionally built round white sensors that would blend into the most common paint color that you'd have on doors or walls and those kinds of things. So the intention was to give you that peace of mind without sort of slapping you in the face with technology every time you walked into your house.
So you did a Kickstarter. You were, I think I misspoke. I said you were the CTO, but you were the chief architect. Yeah. So I stepped either on your shoes or on the CTO's shoes. I don't know which one it was, so I apologize. And then what? You were there for how long, and why did you come back to Deloitte? Why did you boomerang?
Yeah, so I was there for about 2 years. Man, building a hardware company is hard, like really hard. And everyone tells you hardware is hard, and I think it's a cliche for a very good reason. And so we were.
It's not a cliche if it's that hard,
right? And so we did the Kickstarter campaign, and we launched a pretty successful beta with mostly friends and family, but it was really, really hard for us to get a product out there. And so for Kickstarter, we had said that we were going to be shipping in the summer of the following year. So we were basically asking for about 9 months between the Kickstarter campaign and the launch. It ended up taking us almost another full year to really get a product out there. And part of that's just because we wanted to build the best product we could build. Part of that was, when you're building a hardware thing, you depend on other players that you don't necessarily depend on when you're doing software. We had contract manufacturers that had to, sort of get their stuff in line. We had the plastics manufacturers for the cases, for the sensors, and for the bridge. We had the packaging that we had to figure out. So there were like all these other things. And so in January of 2016, my wife and I found out that we were having a baby, and it seemed like a good time to to think about making a move. And Notion was in a good spot. They a couple months later ended up actually raising a pretty sizable A round, and they're still doing really well right now. I think there were 4 of us when we started. I think they're at about 25 or 30 people right now, so they're still doing really well. But it seemed like a good opportunity for me to take all of the things that I had learned about building a hardware platform and all of the software that came with supporting that, and take it into the enterprise. Right, we've got so many clients here at Deloitte that are really trying to figure out not only like how do they connect things, how do they get data into their system, but once it's there, that's sort of the easy part. Putting a Wi-Fi chip into a device is kind of step 0, and that's a little bit basic, if you will. Really, the challenge that I think a lot of companies are having is, okay, look, now we've got more data than we ever had before. What do we do with it? How do we capitalize on it? Is it a potential new revenue stream for us as a business? Like, there's so many questions that they're trying to answer. It was like a really good time for me to come back and really think about how we could help clients answer some of those questions and solve some of those problems.
If you're just joining us now, I'm Robert Schmid, the Chief IoT Technologist for Deloitte, and you're watching Coffee with Mr. IoT. Today, my guest is Jordan Stone. And we're just riffing about 2 boomerangs, talking about leaving Deloitte and coming back, and our lives before, in between Deloitte and now back at Deloitte. So you did a startup, you did a Kickstarter, you brought out the product. Some people like me waited a year longer, but you finally had a product, and they're actually still out there. And they've actually grown since you left, and so Notion is still there. And yep. I guess I have to ask you before we get to a little bit to Deloitte, are you running Notion at home?
No. Do I have it at home?
Yeah,
I've got a couple of sensors at home. They actually just released a second version of the actual sensor itself that I haven't got my hands on. Yeah, I've got a ton of connected devices. I think much to my wife's chagrin, because now like she can't touch any of the light switches. She can only do things through Alexa. Every couple of weeks I'm like, hey, we just connected this, but it's been great. Like, we've got our sprinkler system and a ton of our lights and the garage, and all these things are connected. That it's been really interesting to see not only how each of these individual devices work, but one of our big plays at Notion was how do we integrate across devices? One of the problems that we had as a sensor company was we can tell you that your door is open and you're not home, or we can tell you that there's a water leak in your basement. But at that point, like, our interaction with you as a user or a consumer sort of ended, right? Like, we couldn't do anything about it. We couldn't turn off the water. We couldn't shut your door or window. We couldn't affect your thermostat if we told you that the nursery was getting 5 or 7 degrees higher than you wanted it to get. And so that really brought out this need for integration. And the more IoT devices I acquire, the more I really see the power of having devices that can sort of maybe either talk to each other or at least affect each other through some sort of intermediary.
I have to tell you, I was going to ask you, do you still hack in your spare time? And what I mean by hack is, do you still go and do what you just said, combine this sensor with that sensor through some of your own coding? And I know the answer. The answer is yes, because you told me you're doing this. You did this over the holidays, right?
Yeah. In fact, I'm working on something right now that we're pretty excited about, and it's about using. So since coming back to Deloitte from doing the IoT thing, one of the other things that's really been interesting to me as we really started doing a ton of work at Notion around data, and ultimately, we were having conversations around, do we get to a point where the data that we're collecting is so valuable that we just give the sensors away for free? The hardware piece is sort of a means to an end. And that's true of a lot of companies, right? We've seen that conversation happen with Amazon and the Echo platform. Even Apple sort of has this push and pull around, like, are they a hardware company that sells phones, or are they sort of a software company that sells apps on the App Store and that sort of thing? And so I started really getting into machine learning, artificial intelligence, computer vision. So I'm working on something right now that's combining an IoT sensor and some computer vision to hopefully help measure compliance in food safety, is sort of where we're looking.
So I walked into a plant for a manufacturer of food.
Yep.
And they smocked me. I had a smog, like a coat, a white coat, and I had a helmet, and I had a net, and I had a face net for my very little hair that I have on my whole head. And then I walked in, and I had to think of you, right? Because the first thing I had to do is they have machines where you stick your hands in, and they wash your hands for a certain amount of time. So you don't even move your hands. You like sit there, and they get washed with soap and rinsed and so forth. And then when it stops, it's done, and then you pull it out. So their answer to how long you wash your hands was you stuck them in a machine and washed them in there.
It's like going into surgery almost. Like,
yeah, it felt a little bit like this, except I didn't put any gloves on. But I really literally sat there and I thought, oh my God, this is so Jordan. I wish Jordan was here. I didn't bring my phone, so I would have recorded it otherwise, and I would have shown it to you. But
yeah, that's
Jordan hacking, in case anybody wonders. And I call it hacking lovingly because I know when Jordan does something, it's pretty well defined. So tell me, you've been in the IoT space 3-4 years ago, and you're in the IoT space now with us.
Yep.
What's different today versus then?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest things that's different today, in 2014 when we started really talking about building Notion as a true company, there was no like AWS IoT, there was no GE Predix, like these platforms weren't there.
For the PTC ThingWorks too, so that would just have the whole balance there.
Yeah, ThingWorks. I mean, none of those guys were really there, or if they were there, we were in this place where there were either no options, so we had to build it ourselves, or there were so many options that we didn't want to really invest in one or two because we didn't know who was going to make it. When we launched the Kickstarter campaign, again, integrations was a big part of our play as a company, and we had backers, requesting that we integrated with some hub called the Ninja Box or something like that, and all these other things. And it was like, if we tried to integrate with every single thing, half of those products aren't even around anymore. The other half probably rebranded or got acquired. And so the same was true as we were trying to think about, building this IoT platform, if you will. And it's so much more than, okay, you put like a, Wi-Fi or Bluetooth in a sensor and then you connect it to the cloud and put data in a database. Like that's at a most basic level, I guess that's what sort of an IoT platform is. But there were so many other things that there just wasn't a solution for. One of the biggest challenges we had was, how do we get firmware updates out onto devices in a secure fashion, B, in a timely fashion, and C, one of the challenges we had was, a lot of people were buying our product for security purposes, for, monitoring doors and windows and water leaks. How long does a firmware patch take? And do you let the user know that, hey, we're about to patch your water leak sensor, so hopefully you don't have a water leak in the next 10 minutes because we'll miss it, right? Because your sensor's offline while it's updating. There were all these other kinds of questions around that. One of my big focuses at Notion was around IoT security. How do we secure the data on the device from the sensor to the bridge, from the bridge to the cloud, and then as that data is moving around between all of the components in the back end? And unfortunately, I think that IoT is one of those spaces where security is a little bit of an afterthought, and people are very, very cautious about connecting too many, bringing in too many connected things into their homes. And security is a big part of that. But I think we've seen a lot of maturity in that space as well. That again, were things that we needed to think about. How do we do this ourselves? Because there's no platform where security is sort of given to you. And so thinking about it from then to now, what I see that I think is really nice is how you get firmware updates out, how you handle security. Like these are all sort of table stakes for any IoT company. And it's not something that any company, every single company should have to figure out and re-implement themselves. That fortunately, a lot of these platforms are taking care of that for you now. The next step of that is, okay, now that you collecting the data securely and storing it somewhere, how do you analyze it? How do you do machine learning? How do you do predictive analytics? Those were, again, all things that we sort of built that a lot of these platforms, ThingWorks, AWS IoT, they're sort of giving to you. And so it allows companies to really focus on what their niche is in the market instead of having to build out all of that boilerplate scaffolding.
Very cool, very cool. How about sensors today? And you talked about much of the processing you did was in the cloud. And today, I find myself at many clients where we actually do processing right there on the shop floor, or in other cases, right on the edge, particularly with video, right? Because you want to send all video back to the cloud, or particularly with large volumes of data. So what do you see today around edge computing? What do you see today around ambient computing? We called it for a while. And how about the sensors? I mean, you started having 7 sensors in one little Oreo cookie back 4 years ago. What's happening today?
Yeah, I think that what we're seeing, and you and I were talking about this when we were together in person a couple of weeks ago, is even the cloud players, AWS, their big push this year and last year around IoT has been compute at the edge. So, AWS has their Greengrass platform that allows you to basically run a handful of their cloud services actually on the device. And that, would that have helped Notion or helped us build a better product? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, partially the reason that we made the choice that we made was cost, right? We were able to put less compute power in each individual sensor and bridge because the cost of compute in the cloud is and was, especially at the time, much, much cheaper. Today, the cost of compute on the node or on the edge is drastically reduced from where it was even a couple of years ago. Obviously, the cost of the actual hardware itself to support that compute has gone down. And I think what we're seeing is, especially in a lot of the use cases that we handle here at Deloitte, which is less consumer and more industrial, compute at the edge is even more important, right? On the shop floor, in an industrial complex, oil and gas and mining is another one, right? Like, how do you handle, you can't have a cloud-based solution in a mine that's 3-4 miles underground or whatever it is, or out on an oil rig in the middle of the ocean. Those are much, much harder solutions to compile. And so the more we can move to the edge, not only does it open up a ton of use cases, but then you start thinking about how is performance impacted without, to your point, having to like ship all this video content into the cloud and process it and wait for a response. There's all, the internet is just sort of a flaky thing, or can be a flaky transportation medium in general. So you get a couple of those benefits. And then there's also security, right? Like, you're not sending that data anywhere. And for a lot of companies, being able to sort of keep all that data at the edge and do all that compute there is a big promise. So I think we're seeing a lot happen, and that's super exciting.
Jordan, we're coming to the end, and I want to ask you a question that's been that has to be in people's mind. It's always on my mind, and I think I've been in both places, and I want to hear what you think about this, right? You started a company, or you worked at a company, you worked at Deloitte, and you went to a company with 4 people, and now you're back to Deloitte, where we are 200,000 people altogether.
Yeah.
Give us the field difference. What, just give me one really good thing and give me a funny thing about being in the difference between the two of them.
Yeah. I mean, especially part of Deloitte Digital, and we talked about this even right after the Ubermind acquisition.
Were you actually in Whistler when that merger happened? They had a big event in Whistler. Were you there for that?
I was not, unfortunately. I joined right after that event, like I think 3 months after that.
Because I spoke at that event. I don't know if you knew that, but I was actually, when I was at Activision, I was invited to speak there by Deloitte because I was a client of Deloitte then, right? And so I was actually in Whistler speaking at that event. So we just missed each other. Funny, sorry, I'm sorry I interrupted you, but go back.
No, that's okay. We always used to joke that like working for the studios, working for Deloitte Digital was like, but you were backed by this super strong venture fund that allowed us to really explore new technologies, and that's still true today. The project that you mentioned that I was hacking on over our week off at the end of the year, I just we just bought a bunch of hardware components and put a bunch of stuff together, and we've got a room upstairs with augmented and virtual reality equipment, a bunch of IoT stuff, the devices all around here. So being here where, in startup life, we've got 30, 60, 90 days of runway. That's definitely not a concern that we have here. And I think on the flip side of that, one of the funnier things, one of the more challenging things has been that notion. If we thought there was a better way to do something, we just did it. What, the old way sucked, this new way is way better. Let's just make this decision and go with it. A little bit more process here, right? Not only at Deloitte, but when you're talking about enterprises, the decision is so much broader than it is when you're a 4-person company working out of with a bunch of folding plastic tables, than it is if you're a Fortune 500 or Fortune 100 company that has millions of customers and is dealing with millions of dollars of transactions. So that said, I think that part of the reason why I came back to Deloitte was being able to sort of have had experience in both worlds, and this as well, having done the boomerang. There's a perspective that we get to bring to a lot of our engagements with clients, to just sort of be a little bit removed from the client's world, or even from just the consulting world. Had the experience of what it takes to like build a product and launch a product and sustain a product. I'm super thankful to have had both experiences and to be back here doing it for a lot of our clients.
Well, thank you. I have to tell you, it's funny that you talk about the decision process, right? Because I always think that if it's someone else's idea, I appreciate this little inertia, because it's sort of like all the bad ideas get filtered out, because there's inherent resistance, and so the bad ideas never get done. When it's my idea, obviously, then I think it's a great idea, and I hate that inertia because it's sort of like really stopping me, right? And
yeah, absolutely.
With a big grain of sarcasm or irony in it. So, but yeah, it's a different process, and it's also true that there's a lot of people here, a lot of smart people here that have input, which is great, and also slows it down sometimes. But I think that's the piece I enjoy the most about Deloitte, how many really interesting people there. Jordan, welcome back, or you've been back for a while now, but welcome back anyhow. It's great to have you on the show. Thank you for chewing the fat with me here on Coffee with Mr. IoT. With that, I just want to say, join me again next Friday, 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern, for another Coffee with Mr. IoT. And by the way, if you missed any part of today's conversation, you can watch the episode again on my YouTube channel, as well as previous conversations. With that, happy Friday, everyone. Thank you, Jordan. I'll see you later.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. Thanks, everybody. Bye.